Welcome to my virtual diner. Pull up a seat at the counter. Get comfortable. Most shows talk about the people. I talk to them. This is Real America with me, Bridget Phetasy. Welcome back to the show. It has been a wild decade. People left the left, left the right. Independents moved to the left and the right. And more people have had it with either major party turning to anarchy, apathy, or conspiracy, or just doubling down. During these political realignments and tumultuous culture wars, it's easy to lose your bearings. It's easy to get reactive or negatively polarize yourself into some pretty dark places. I've joked that this entire culture feels like we are in the movie Inception without a totem. How do we know what's real? How do we know what's important? What fights are worth fighting? During my most intense moments of political homelessness, people would ask me how I stayed grounded. And to be honest, I'm not sure that I did. I came from the left, and so a lot of what I thought were my politics turned out to be emotionalism masquerading for truths. It was disorienting to feel like I had no clear idea what I valued or believed. And what ultimately ended up grounding me, what became my totem, was identifying the hills that I would die on. One of those hills was free speech. Everything flows from there. The founders made it Amendment number 1 for a reason. Freedom of speech allows us to have freedom of thought. As restrictions on what is acceptable speech spread, we begin to question our own thoughts. The loss of freedom of speech is insidious, and once the censorship spreads to our minds, we become easier and easier to rule. We stop allowing certain thoughts. We start self-censoring. We saw a lot of this over the past decade. We stop questioning, and a part of us and our vibrant society dies. Freedom of speech isn't for sissies either. It requires a thick skin. You can have freedom of speech or you can have safetyism, but you really can't have both. In the name of political correctness and under the guise of hate speech, this foundational freedom has been under attack. We take for granted how free we are in the West, and America is unparalleled in its commitment to letting every dumbass have a voice. That's not the case everywhere else. This week, comedy writer Graham Linehan was arrested at London Heathrow Airport on suspicions of inciting violence. He was returning from a trip to America when 5 police officers pulled him off the plane and detained him for tweets he posted on X in April. We'll post a link to his story in the description below. Here's what he tweeted. If a trans-identified male is in a female-only space, he is committing a violent, abusive act. Make a scene, call the cops, and if all else fails, punch him in the balls. Obviously, it's a joke. He's not actually telling people to nut punch men dressed as women. If anything, he's calling out violence, the predatory behavior of some men who have found their way into women's private spaces. So, what was his crime? He expressed himself, and his words hurt people's feelings. Even more chilling, he tweeted that while he was in America on an American-based social media site. Even hate speech is protected here. Offensive and hurtful speech is protected. Jokes, rumors, satire are all protected alongside religious beliefs. And yet he is still being punished in the UK for his tweets here. And he's not the first person to get arrested for a violent tweet. In fact, as our guest tonight, Greg Lukianoff, pointed out on X today, more than 10,000 Britons have been arrested every year for offense speech since 2021. Yes, the thing everyone tells me isn't happening is happening. England is not so open-minded about words. A growing number of British people are getting arrested for social media posts, even retweets and political cartoons. Here in America, from my perspective, it feels like we're living through a bit of a free speech renaissance golden era after a decade of intense language policing. The new inquisitors of the past decade have somewhat retreated or at least gone into hibernation. All the forbidden words are back on the roster, and language has gotten so open that the South Park creators were joking that if it gets any looser, they'll be out of a job. But it's only a matter of time before the authoritarian impulse to control language returns. And as we can see with some of the lawsuits, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression is currently fighting against the Trump administration. This is a bipartisan impulse. We have to defend these foundational principles. The First Amendment doesn't make what happens in the UK impossible to happen here, but it makes it much more difficult. So let's get into it. My guest tonight is Greg Lukianoff, president of the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, FIRE. He's a First Amendment expert, and he co-authored The Coddling of the American Mind with Jonathan Haidt, which is a great book about how safetyism has turned college campuses into an anti-free speech commune, into anti-free speech communes full of jumpy radicals. So let's test the limits of our God-given right to say whatever crazy shit we can think of and get into it. But first time I've ever been on camera in glasses, I'm an old. Secondly, some quick housekeeping. Are you guys going to take me more seriously now that I have glasses? Please don't. But some housekeeping. If you want to be called on, you need to be on Zoom on camera, and you need to virtually raise your hand by clicking the reactions button. If you aren't on Zoom and want to be a part of our virtual live audience right now or in the future, click the link in the description below and to get the Zoom link, or go to tway.tv/Bridget Zoom and you will get the link. The Zoom link is the same link every time, so save it somewhere. The voice of God you will hear is cousin Maggie.
Hello, everyone.
Many of you already know her. She's my cousin and co-producer. We make lots of other stuff together, like our shows Dumpster Fire, Walk-Ins Welcome, and all the other content you can find at Phetasy.com. Maggie will be monitoring the chat. If you have something to say and you raise your hand, Maggie will message you privately to find out what you'd like to talk about. She's going to help us stay on topic. We cannot guarantee that we'll get to everyone, but we do try to do our best. And everyone knows my number one rule is don't be a dick. So please don't be a dick and everything will be fine. But, you know, you can still say what you want around here. You just have to deal with the consequences, like getting booted from the chat. And now I'm an authoritarian immediately by the end of this. And now a word from our sponsor, Quest. Are you dealing with an HMO like I am? It is such a pain in the butt. If I want to get any sort of testing done to ensure I'm making my health a priority, I usually have to wait weeks for an appointment to see my primary care doctor and then get a referral from her or him and wait weeks for an appointment with whatever specialist I need to see. Quest helps you cut through all the insurance nonsense and get the tests you need when you need them. Quest offers over 150 of the same tests trusted by doctors, including diagnostics for specific ailments like STDs, chronic conditions like heart, liver and kidney disease, as well as testing that is almost never covered by health insurance, like fertility and advanced women's hormone testing. Quest also offers broad packages of tests that go way beyond the standard tests you typically get in an annual medical checkup visit. Concierge medicine and functional medicine doctors, like acupuncture, for example, charge thousands of dollars for these types of workups. Quest offers them for the price of a night on the town, and then you can just take them to those places. Your health and well-being is worth it. Visit questhealth.com and use discount code REALMay25 and get 20% off your purchase. That's questhealth.com, code REALMay25 for 20% off. All right, let us bring our guest, Greg Lukianoff, who's had an extremely busy day on the podcast circuit. Welcome to Real America, Greg. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Bridget. Great to see you. And I dig the glasses.
Thank you. Does it make me look a little bit more classy and respectable?
So classy, so clever.
How's your day been? I loved what you said to me in the green room before we came in.
It's been insane. It's been absolutely crazy. I've done multiple podcasts. I did TV in Britain. I did the BBC, and that was that's the story right there. We got a verdict in the Harvard case. We filed a lawsuit in Texas. It's been crazy.
Wait, so when you were in the green room, you were saying it's been a busy day for free speech. Tell me what's going on? I feel, and I don't have this front row seat that you have. I just have a kind of cheap seat culture war observer. Are there more attacks on free speech than there have been, or is it the same?
The global picture is getting worse for sure.
Okay.
And that's scary as hell, because when every country around us is turning on freedom of speech, and and in the formerly free world as well, that's a big problem, because it's very
Hmm.
hard to maintain. Like, if we're the only country protecting free speech at all, if we're totally alone in this, that's a problem. And also, I do have issues with some of the things the Trump administration is doing. I know that some of that is to battle the kind of nonsense that's going on in the European Union, or in the Anglosphere. But my job is to call balls and strikes, and to make sure you're still playing according to the First Amendment. But
So,
the BBC thing was fascinating, by the way, though, because my mother's British. I spent a lot of time over there as a kid. And they are in complete and utter denial they are even in a free speech crisis.
wow.
And I did this BBC show, and I think I was, because Graham Linehan, I don't know how to say his name, but the guy who wrote Father Ted and the IT crowd, he got arrested for those tweets that you mentioned. And there's been this, like, oh no, it's not really that bad in Britain, kind of like reaction from a lot of people in Britain. And I was on BBC, as best I can tell, to be the how dare you Americans pick on the United States for being in trouble. Isn't the Trump administration bad on free speech? And I was just constantly like, no, guys, you're in serious, serious trouble.
Yeah, that's what's really interesting, because a lot of people were saying, "Oh, this is a line in the sand, and this is going to wake everybody up in Britain." And I had text communications with a lot of our mutual friends, and we were talking about this, like, "Oh, this is the thing that's going to wake them up." And I'm like, "I don't. Do you get that sense? I don't feel like it is."
It was powerful that there were some politicians actually saying maybe our hate speech laws have gone too far, and that's the first time I've seen recognition of that at all. So maybe it does give me a little bit of hope. But here's the problem. In order to so basically, you're in the strongest position for freedom of speech if you have two different things: strong free speech law and a strong free speech culture. Britain has neither at this point. And when I go
Mm,
over there, they'll talk. People are like, well, like someone said something really offensive in this case, and saying, just like they would say, the idea of like punching someone who's trans in the nuts, would, that's inciting violence. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's cracking a joke about what you should do if a man is in a woman's space that nobody would have batted an eye at, in any
mhm.
other context. So when I go over there, and I talk to Brits these days, I really do feel like they're in the most dangerous situation of all, where they believe the moral fervor and the good guys really are the censors at this point. I know this isn't all Britons, but more that I would hope that number would be zero. So I'm worried about the situation over there. I'm also worried about the situation in the EU and in Canada and Ireland and pretty much everywhere else.
Yeah, that's the culture of free speech is something I'm really fascinated with, because it does seem to, obviously it's like driving a lot of the panic around the words and the hate speech and being offended and whatnot, and the kind of safetyism that you've written and talked so much about. But from just a legal perspective, can you help me understand this? Who makes the call, arrest Graham when he gets off the plane? Like, what is that chain of command that even happens? Who's monitoring his tweets? Who's saying, all right, we need to make an example of this guy, which is somewhat what it feels like. Do you have any insight into how this went down?
Well, I mean, it's coordinated in the police departments all around Britain, and they have really come together on this idea of getting people, of policing speech, literally, like showing up at people's houses. You've surely seen videos of people being
Mhm.
arrested at home, oftentimes pensioners, being arrested at home. So they've been coordinating these efforts for a while. But in Britain, there's a variety of different impositions on freedom of speech, and some that go back. I remember like 20 years ago, I was explaining, listen, the national security laws in Britain are insane.
Right.
That there are things that we take for granted in the United States you can talk about in our government that you can't talk about in Britain, and it's gotten far, far worse. They also have some quasi independent bodies that police online speech. It's a pretty comprehensive, police state in a lot of ways, and really, like, and I make the point when I say that 10,000 people have been arrested, I'm only talking about under one particular law, which is about offensive speech on the internet, which is surely bad enough. But there is also this thing called non-crime hate incidents, in which like million people get arrested every year. Or I'm not sure if it's every year, but I think overall something like a million people have been arrested under it. So there are multiple different ways that people can get in trouble just for what they say at this point. And when you say 10,000 people arrested just under this one law, so it's been about 12,000 people for 2023 and 2022. The 2024 data, we don't have it yet, and I'm dying to know like how much worse it's gotten, because it's clearly gotten worse.
Mm-hmm.
And I always make the point that, listen, the number of people who were arrested during the entire first Red Scare is about 4,000.
Right.
That was a 2-year thing.
Mm-hmm.
Britain is like 1/5 the size of the United States at this point, and they're arresting 25,000 people for hurdy words on the interwebs.
And when you talk about the national security stuff there, what does that mean? You just what can't.
That it can be so, like, we have the famous Pentagon Papers, came from
Mm-hmm.
the United States, where essentially Daniel Ellsberg, he did something that was, arguably illegal, or actually, well, it would probably be currently illegal under different agreements. That anyway, it got to the New York Times, and the question was whether or not, that given this was top secret within the U.S. government, did that apply to the New York Times, to the Boston Globe, to the Washington Post? And the answer was, listen, if the press gets this information, it's that they have the freedom to publish it. They're not obligated to go by your decision that this is national security. In Britain, you absolutely do. So if you had a case just like the Pentagon Papers, that person would be, put behind bars probably for a very long time.
Right. And what's going on in America? What happened in Texas today? My state.
Texas has it's in the UT system. They have a system policy that actually says that there is no free speech period between like the hours of like 10 p.m. and like 6 a.m. And what's funny is this was so poorly drafted. People need to understand what this means. This means no First Amendment activities is pretty much the way they put it. And you know what includes First Amendment activities? What you wear, what music you listen to, what t-shirts you wear, what books you read. It's one of these things where it's laughably overbroad. What they're trying
Mm-hmm.
is probably, I hope at least, that if you're going to be protesting after a certain hour, maybe with a bullhorn, you're going to need permission. But that's not the way they put it. They pass this ridiculously, laughably overbroad policy, which we believe is going to be shot down by a court pretty handily.
So that just seems like a poorly worded policy.
But that's very common on campus, is that
Mm-hmm.
essentially they have these ridiculously vague and broad speech codes, and then they're just a loaded gun to use whenever they want to use them.
Right. This is actually something your coworker, Sarah McLaughlin, was really pointing out yesterday. She came on my other podcast, Watkins Welcome, to talk about her new book. The title of her book again?
Authoritarians in the Academy.
Authoritarians in the Academy. And she was saying one of the things that you can do is have very clearly written policies because of exactly this. You can wield it, that cudgel, however you want to, if it's broadly written and it has like very wide scope and it's not clearly defined, the terms and conditions. And it sounds like it's kind of a shit show, though.
Yeah, things are busy.
Oh,
We also just got a decision in the Harvard case that just came down. A court found in favor of Harvard's First Amendment lawsuit against the Trump administration. And this was something that we also saw coming, because I think Harvard was very vulnerable in a variety of different ways. One is the anti-Semitism claim, and two, but also for ongoing policies that discriminate on the basis of race in hiring and admissions. And if you're found guilty of either of those things, it is within federal law that you can remove funding. But one, the Trump administration didn't decide to follow any of those procedures at all, just jumped right ahead and sent Harvard a letter saying that essentially that we will settle, essentially with Harvard if you give us control over who gets admitted, the curriculum, who you hire. It's basically like, so you're saying that we'll settle if you let us take over Harvard entirely, which is not within the power
Right.
of any of these laws to do. So we thought this was, and this is frustrating to me on multiple levels, not the least of which is I think there should be massive reform in higher ed as it exists, but you have to still go within the law. And the thing that Trump was kept doing that actually makes his own team's job so much harder is by constantly saying, pointing out that this is about this opinion and this speech here and there. You make it really easy to lose a First Amendment case, because when you go say it's like, well, no, this is actually about harassment and patterns of discriminatory behavior. It's like, but your boss actually said this was about this person saying that one thing, and you're in big trouble, and you're going to lose your lawsuit, which we knew they were going to lose.
Yeah, there's so many things I don't understand too about just the globalization of a lot of when it comes to free speech and our kind of global economy that we live in. Like in Graham's case, he was in America, as I was saying, on an American based company and goes to the UK and he gets punished for that. That seems weird. As I talked to your colleague about, it gets very murky when you have laws that are in, opposition to our freedom of speech, when you have these campuses that have satellites in places where there is not really any free speech.
Yeah.
How do you manage that tension
Yeah.
legally?
Generally, like if you're in a country and you break their laws, you could be in big trouble. So the question is whether or not schools want to actually have a Doha, campus, or a Beijing campus. And if they have them, shouldn't they be guaranteed some amount of academic freedom and free speech within that sphere? And if not, should they really have them? It
Mm.
is one of the big questions there. But partially because, and I mean, the European Union has become the font of some of the worst ideas when it comes to freedom of speech, and for innovation as well. There's a reason why, Europe has become the continent where innovation goes to die. You look at the lack of growth of companies there. Like one Silicon Valley company would be like the number one company in pretty much all of Europe at this point.
Right.
But they keep on trying to impose, their restrictions on artificial intelligence, their restriction on this thing called the right to be forgotten, that basically means that in the name of something, you have the right to make sure that people take down those stories about you beating your wife, or like whatever, like all the things that you would,
What?
yeah, like all the things that you would be checking, like after a date with someone to try to find out whether or not this guy's a creep or not. And I
So
get,
this isn't just after you're dead. This is like after
oh,
what? A
just
90-day period?
after a couple of years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they basically made the incentive so that it made no sense for anyone to really challenge their any social media company to challenge, or Google to challenge the takedown notice. And then they tried to make this like global law, to essentially say everybody, no, it's not just in Europe that you have to take down those links, it's everywhere. And it and
That's
it,
crazy.
there was a similar thing that they tried in Australia as well. And it's kind of like, you are not God King of all things to in all countries. Like this is not okay. And more recently, there was just, and actually this is out of Britain, to something very a law that's very similar to the one in the European Union, where they were threatening Kiwi Farms, and 4chan and a couple other websites, even though they don't formally do any business in the UK for content on Kiwi Farms and 4chan. Those companies decided to have a lawsuit actually in Britain about their First Amendment rights. I think that's a risky way to do it. But and any of your listeners, if this happens, and we're working with Substack on this as well, if someone is a American-based writer, podcaster, whatever, and you get one of these attempts to enforce a foreign law limiting your freedom of speech in the United States, I want that case.
Okay. Good to know. I mean, we have quite a few hands raised, so I feel like we should hear from the people.
Sure.
Maggie, who do we have first?
Okay. First, we're going to bring up Margaret.
Hi, Margaret.
Up here.
Oops. Hi. Can you hear me?
We
Yes.
can hear you.
Yes. Good. Okay. So I wanted to give a little bit of what I thought was good news on the free speech front. We lived overseas for a while, in Doha, actually. So I totally hear what you're saying about Doha universities. But having lived over there, I have a lot of British friends.
Yeah.
Recently, some kind of lefty British friends were actually putting some stuff up about patriotism and how they were proud of being British from a left-wing point of view. And, you know, they fought off the Nazis and they had all these wonderful authors who, and I thought, ooh, I don't think I would have seen that 2 or 3 years ago.
No, we wouldn't have.
And they seemed to be getting some responses from other friends who were normally left-wing themselves and praised them. So I thought, huh, that's a good thing. And I wondered if you're seeing with these protests kind of an idea that there are Britons who have said enough is enough, and we are going to fight back against the government.
I certainly hope so. I have been disappointed talking to Britons when I'm over there, even ones who tend to be pretty good on free speech. They're kind of unbothered by the huge scale of the censorship. Then that was troubling to me. I was there. Yet last year, Fire sponsored the Battle of Ideas over there, and so we went over, and I was, I talked to Andrew Doyle's audience, just being like, "Wake up, people! Like this is not normal. Like I know you've gotten used to this, but I would be absolutely thrilled if there was pushback in Britain, because I think that it's not just the case that we need to hold on to free speech in the United States. We have to start regaining some ground here, because if literally everywhere else is like, speech is free except for wrongthink, we're all in serious trouble.
Yeah.
And
have you?
Go on, hon.
Sorry. The extent of the protest. I mean, is it true that there were huge protests this weekend? I mean, I was still on vacation, so I didn't see, but it seemed like there were big protests in Britain this weekend.
I don't actually know.
Yes, maybe.
Where are you located?
Okay.
Margaret?
Me? I'm in Las Vegas.
Oh, okay.
I'm in Las Vegas. So,
got it.
Yeah. Like I said, I have a lot of British friends because I used to live in Doha, and there are a lot of Brits in Doha. So.
Thank you, Margaret.
And Abu Dhabi. But.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, next I'm going to bring up Reynolds. We have a bunch of hands here, guys.
Yeah.
A lot of people want to talk about it.
So there are two types of censorship. One is through the government, which I'm not that worried about because we do have the First Amendment. But I think the bigger one that's going to affect everybody is sort of the internet censorship. Whether it's through AI or through Google searches. Like you could, there have been reports of someone typing in like, what's the Republican stance on X, Y, and Z? And then all it does is that on the first page of Google talks about Democrat stance on X, Y, Z. And if you go back to even bigger, it's like debanking. You speak, and then at that point, the bank says, and Biden pushed this, well, we want to debank you. And so now you can't go to any bank. So, I mean, I think we're in a lot of trouble on free speech.
Yeah.
In a sense, if we don't pass either a law or a constitutional amendment that says, hey, because the internet is so important in our lives, that there's not a First Amendment right to say what you want to on the internet, what good does it do you? Because 90% of the people, do things over the internet. So, I mean, you could sit there, the government, you could be, deplatforming. They could sit there and say, well, I don't like Maggie, or I don't like, two-way. Therefore, thank you. We're going to take you off the internet. And there have been that have been taken off YouTube, and there's no recourse because there's people say, oh, that's a private company.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. But if you're using public airways, I would think the Supreme Court needs to get involved in this. Say, well, this is public airways, therefore the First Amendment applies to you. And do you think there is a court case that you could take to the Supreme Court and argue the internet is public airways, therefore you cannot do this in debanking? So I'll be quiet and let you. I want to hear your answer about that, Greg.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. And first, I'm going to say where I agree. Debanking. When it comes to, a terrifying state power that can be used, more coercively than almost anything else, it's the ability for the state to coerce, push, or encourage banks to basically make you a non-entity. And so FIRE, is very libertarian in our in the way we think about government. Like our job is to limit the power of government. But when it comes to a law that we might consider, that if a law came up in the United States that said you may not debank someone on the basis of political viewpoint or things protected under the First Amendment, we'd strongly consider that. We probably wouldn't oppose it. We might even endorse it, because it is very easy to destroy any institution that you want if you basically say, sure, you can have your freedom of speech, but you don't have access to your money anymore.
Yeah.
That's a death sentence. However, the idea that we need to make the internet sort of like to create rights on the internet that are enforced against private companies is actually a formula, I think, for a really deep tyranny. Because essentially the people who would be in charge of enforcing that would be the government. And I think it would take them about 2 minutes to be like, hey, we're protecting free speech on here, as required online. I now dictate to you, private companies, everything that you can and cannot say. And think about this, think about this power in the hand of Gavin Newsom, or for that matter, Gray Abbott. Like I think that that's a power that you really don't want to give the state. So I think it's very important to respect the First Amendment rights of private companies. However, there is one distinction there, and this is something that I think that the Supreme Court got quite wrong. We were involved in a case, a pretty recent Supreme Court case, called Missouri v. Biden, that eventually became Murthy v. Biden, Murthy v. Missouri. And it was a case where the question was, could the government jawbone, as in like persuade, coerce social media companies to censor speech that the government itself could not censor? And our position was, yeah, no, if the government's putting pressure on a social media company to censor you for speech that's perfectly protected under the First Amendment, it's violating its First Amendment obligations. It's not allowed to do that. And we really should have, like that case, I think we really should have won. And it was actually thrown out on basically not quite even a technicality. It was said that they didn't have, the people who challenged it didn't have standing. Now, I think that's wrongly decided to begin with, because the line between these individuals getting kicked off Twitter or Facebook or whatever was sufficiently clear to the government pushing for people like them to be kicked off, that I think that actually they should have had standing. But what was particularly maddening was that Mark Zuckerberg, just a couple months after this wrongly decided decision, said that he really regretted caving to the government so many times during that. And we're like, dude, if you had been a plaintiff in this fight, you absolutely would have gotten standing, and we would have a decision saying that the government can't do that. It can't actually lean on social media companies or other companies to censor speech that it itself cannot actually censor. So those are kind of like the three different aspects on your question.
But I mean, for my argument, and I understand what you're saying, but if you were to pass a law to give a person the ability to sue an internet company saying, hey, you're violating my free speech. Again, it's a private company. So I'm not saying the government goes to the internet companies and do what you said, like Biden said, suppress, like during COVID, when people were trying to talk about the lab leak theory, they suppressed that. Well, a private individual can't then go sue Facebook and say, hey, you're taking away my posts. But if you had an amendment that said, hey, Facebook, if you're going to allow people on your platform, they can say crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And if you take it off, they have the ability to sue you. So there's no recourse. So I'm not saying that I want the government to go towards Facebook. I want it like a right to where people, private citizens who are on Facebook, as long as they're not, advocating fire in the theater type of speech, to be able to sit there and say, hey, I think COVID came from a lab theory, and they got, thrown off. And a lot of that was government pressure, but I can see in the future where you're going to have 3 internet companies and you're going to have 3 CEOs who are going to act like kings out there who decide, well, this is, we no longer like the color blue. So you search color blue and it says, here are the only colors that exist in the world. You think to yourself, well, there's a blue, and I know there's a blue, but I got children, let's say grandchildren grow up and they'll never know the word blue. Companies don't allow the word blue anymore.
Yeah.
So there's got to be some sort of recourse, because
yeah, I think the private right of action approach, which I have heard people say before, one, it interferes with the company's First Amendment rights to decide, what speech they will host, and I think they do actually have, free speech rights and association rights, and I think that it's important to respect those. But I also think that if there was a private right of action to anyone who claims that they were kicked off for speech, it would utterly destroy social media companies as we know them, and it would be be gamed, it would be manipulated by power, it wouldn't be result in this sort of like free speech nirvana. It would end up in just a cacophony of lawsuits and people trying to use the power again of in this case it's the government through the judiciary to dictate to social media companies what is true. The best thing that you can do is have competition among social media companies. And by the way, when people were really desperate to have these kind of laws, it was under this idea that essentially Twitter is a monopoly. There's never going to be anything like it. Nobody can go to some other place. And then that was all proved really foolish in a very short period of time, because people flocked to Blue Sky, people went to Mastodon, even some people went to Threads, if you still remember what that thing was. Like people went to other places, and they exercised, they exercised their purchasing power. People went to Substack, where I write the eternally radical idea. Like I think that the way you actually solve this is by having competition in the literal marketplace. And anytime you create a lot of times what the civil libertarian is telling people is that the solution is worse than the disease in some cases.
So do you have a solution, since you don't like mine?
I think that making sure that social media companies are truly independent, that they're not actually being pressured by the government to censor. I think that I think 230 is actually underappreciated in how much it actually does protect everybody's free speech rights. I think your competition is the way you actually better protect people's freedom of speech, and I think it's working to a degree. And I think it's one of the reasons why the European Union is trying to figure out ways to and the UK is figuring out all sorts of ways to intervene in Mastodon, for example. Like and like they don't even seem to get that Mastodon isn't actually a platform, it's a technology. Like it's a decentralized way to do a kind of Twitter, and they're treating it as if it's like a brick and mortar company. So I do actually think that, like a lot of things, competition. And I'm not the biggest fan of state-controlled media, and I think that I think that the more freedom there is, and the more sort of organic these things can be, the better off we'll all be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reynolds. I am going to bring up Max next.
Quick question. Oh, Greg, why do you think Zuck didn't come forward during that? When you said if he was a plaintiff, was he just like cowardly waiting for the election winds to blow to see where the chips would land?
Yeah. I think that and I can't entirely blame him, for the idea that essentially, if he's worried about his own company being on the wrong side of the Biden administration, might be something he was a little spooked about. He was starting to talk about this more as the election came, but there were a lot of people like who were sort of characterizing what Zuckerberg was doing when he would started talking about opening up Facebook and making it less punitive, allowing people to talk about trans issues, for example, allowing people to get into it more, that was somehow bowing just to make Trump happy. And it's like, no, he's actually been saying this in a variety of ways for a long time.
Mhm.
He just didn't see it. I don't think he thought it was politically feasible
Right.
prior to the election. And that definitely, he took that as a signal that it's like, okay, now we can push back.
Cowards.
But, and meanwhile, like, I'm in the unlucky position of being the person who has to push back first, when it's
Yeah.
the least popular of all. But you don't get into the First Amendment business to be popular.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to bring up Max. Oh, there we go. Let me unmute him.
Hi, Max.
Hey. Oh, okay. I was gonna ask if to me, or I don't know if this is a question or not, but it seems like to me people don't understand jokes and satire anymore on the internet. Like everyone takes everything so seriously, and I feel like people need to do the reverse, because I oftentimes, if I read something really outrageous, I just assume it's a joke.
Yeah.
Like I don't take it at face value, because a lot of people are falling for jokes, and it's like, I don't know. I feel like it's a big problem. Like people don't understand what a joke is anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, part of that I think is just gosh, we had this kind of brilliant moment on last week's show where our guest Ravi was mentioning that the reason that it was so cool that we get to hear from everybody, and this one woman was kind of ranting about something, and he made the point, like, if he read that on the internet, it would sound crazy. If you I think part of it is that we are lacking tone and the reason I started Dumpster Fire is because I wanted people to hear the way I was actually tweeting. I was like, I feel like people, and then we have a lot of everybody's kind of projecting their own opinion and their own background, and everything gets projected into it. And you also have people on whatever substances they might be on, and
that too.
Mostly autistic, like the people who are the most online are the most autistic. So taking
or they're drunk.
Or they're drunk or whatever. But it's like people are taking things very literally, and it's easy to kind of get into that fight. And then I think you have this other problem where the political, as it infected every aspect of the personal, became everybody's personality. And now people are highly identified with politics in a way that they were not necessarily even like 20 years ago.
Yeah. Well, like the recent one is the whole, like, Trump might be dead, or the conspiracy with like, look at his arm and stuff. And I'm like, I can't take it seriously. I'm like, these people have to be joking. Like I think they're posting it just to get conservatives all, wild up and stuff. It's
but
like,
even the right wing was getting very like pearl clutchy about it. And they were like, oh, you can't joke about him being dead. I'm like, I just spent 4 years listening to you guys make fun of an old man who was deteriorating in front of us. You don't get to pick and choose. Like,
but their evidence isn't even good. You're like, it's like,
I mean, and some of the jokes were funny. I was reading a lot of the jokes coming from the left about Trump being dead, and I was like, okay, that's a funny joke. Like, you have to I don't know. We were saying this on Dumpster Fire. I'm like, you don't get to like pick and choose which version of 70s humor you want back. It's either all or nothing.
Yeah.
People were getting mad at me because I was doing an RFK Jr. impression. I'm like, this is your line. This is your line. Okay.
I saw that on your last video, how you apologized for it. And that made it even funnier, because it was like people really got mad about that.
It's tough because we live, everybody, I understand though why people get upset, because we live very much in like a clown nose on, clown nose off era. And now everybody's doing it. It used to just be Jon Stewart. And now it is literally politicians. And so people who were supposed to be serious are now playing that same game of going,
Yeah, it's
well,
true.
do I take you seriously or are you joking? And then we have comics who are now pundits who get to go, oh, I was just kidding when they were being, I mean, I'm guilty of this, I'm
Like,
sure.
Tim Dillon is good at, I can't tell if he's joking or not sometimes when he's doing his
Yeah.
like political rants. You're like, is he joking or is he being truthful? Like, I
At
can't
least
tell.
he kind of commits to the bit though. And I think,
Yeah.
and as during the like big, like when this was coming primarily from the left and the speech policing really was ramping up, particularly with comedians would get attacked for a joke and they would try to defend the content of their joke. And I'm like, don't defend that. Defend your right to be hyperbolic. Yeah. That's all you need to defend. You don't need to defend whatever ridiculous, insane thing you were saying because you're a comedian.
Yeah,
you need
that
to
wasn't
defend your right to be ridiculous.
Because that wasn't supposed to be taken seriously.
Yeah, but people get piled on and they get panicked and then they're like, well, I didn't actually mean that we should put the baby in the, you know, like whatever insane. Wasn't even going to finish that sentence. I was too afraid of like so I do think, and we live in like a super hypersensitive time. You know, everybody was, as much as the right likes to be like crime or lib, everybody's a little bit snowflakey, and we all have our things that we all have our moods, and everybody, as I constantly say in Dumpster Fire, everyone has that sacred cow. Like everyone can be pretty cool about some things, and then you'll touch that thing that's just their thing for whatever reason. Like, well, my dad had dementia, and you know, now you found their thing. So I think, and this is something we've been, I would like to hear from Greg, but my feeling about this is people, we were talking about this today because we watched Dazed and Confused. And I think those, like living through the 90s, you were talking so much shit to each other in person and working in restaurants and working on construction sites and all these places. Like you are just endlessly talking shit to each other. And now that we have this kind of pajama class and hypersensitive students who are taught that they should go have a cry closet if somebody wins an election, you don't have people who are really, they don't have a thick enough skin. This is what I was saying in my monologue. You've got to kind of have a thick skin to be able to be a culture that can handle free speech. And everybody likes to fancy themselves as that, but I dare say,
yeah, what I've noticed with the younger generation is they're good at giving insults, but then when people give an insult back, that's when they crumble. It's like, well, if you're going to give an insult, just be prepared for the insult back or laugh at it. Like, don't get offended by it. It's kind of like, it's like they're playing a game of tennis, but they don't expect you to hit the ball back.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't know. It's tricky with like jokes and stuff, but I know there are more people. Greg, do you have anything quick to say about that? I clearly had a lot.
I had something long to say about that.
No, please say it. Yeah, we've only got
long thing you want.
We've only got one other hand raised right now.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Well, for me, the best and most embarrassing case of, oh, for God's sakes, it's a joke, actually comes from the Supreme Court. And it was an embarrassing moment for the Supreme Court. How many people remember the bong hits for Jesus case?
Not me, but that sounds amazing.
Exactly. So this is like 2003, maybe something like that. So an 18-year-old student, the Olympic torch is going through his hometown in Alaska. The school goes out to have people out there to watch the passing of the Olympic torch, and he's on a public sidewalk with a sign that just says "Bong hits for Jesus." And the first time I heard this, I thought it was hysterical. Like I was just like, that is funny. And by the time, and I don't know why they took this legal strategy, they decided to make the argument that nobody knows what it means. Nobody can know. And it led to this bizarre opinion, and Roberts wrote it, in which they're like, well, since nobody knows what it means, it could mean, for example, and you have the Supreme Court going through this exercise of saying it could be brackets do bong hits for Jesus, or bong hits for Jesus brackets are good. And I'm like, what? are you doing? And they actually found that there was a new exception to free speech for young people, which is speech promoting drug use. And I'm like, he's not even promoting drug use. He's cracking a joke
Wow.
about pot and Jesus. That's funny. And I always made the point that if they'd really leaned into the idea of it's a joke, and I'm pretty sure the word joke does not appear in the entire opinion, it would have slapped at least one Supreme Court justice awake to be like, oh, that's right. We should not actually be punishing this student,
Wow.
cracking this actually funny joke.
Wow.
That's
Well,
crazy.
I'm one of those annoying people on X. I like calling Sydney Sweeney mid because everyone just loses their mind.
Yeah.
But it's a joke. It's clearly a joke.
So this is you out there.
All right, Max.
It's just
I'm
to
gonna
get
bring
people
up
mad.
Goodbye, sacred cow.
How dare you? All right, I'm gonna bring up Curtis next. Thank you, Max.
Thanks, Max. Good to see you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Hi, Curtis.
Oh wait, let me unmute you here, Curtis.
There we go.
There we go.
I wanted to say, it seemed to me that the next huge battle on free speech is going to be the EU and the UK and their pressure on Musk and Twitter X in particular. The EU has threatened to fine him, $1 billion a day or some ridiculous Trump-style fine if he doesn't enforce their speech rules. And the UK is, they're not saying it quite as overtly, but the same thing. And I was actually debating, kind of arguing of all people, Stephen Miller, friend of Watkins, welcome. And he was saying, Musk should just take Twitter away from the UK. And to me, that seems like exactly what they'd like to have is, you don't need to arrest someone for saying something online if they never get to say it in the first place. Yeah. So, I'm like, well, how do you even solve that? Because I've seen even Elon, I think it was one of the South American countries, saying, look, we have to obey the laws of the country. We exist there. And so it's sort of a tough spot. And to me, it seems like the admin needs to step in and Trump needs to, say, look, you're not going to, if you're going to do this to American companies, we're going to do this back to you. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I don't think it's just X, though. I think it's all sorts of companies. The European Union and the UK are already doing this to a degree. They just haven't been quite bold enough to try to bring one of these actions enforcing foreign law in American courts because they know that they'll get smacked down. But I would love to have a case like that. I would love to be involved in that. I would love to be able to tell, be able to tell my mother's country, Britain, it's like, sorry, we have free speech here. You can't actually stop us. Get used to it. It's not going to be the first time.
It seems too that, the folks in the UK that, for now, I guess with X, I think it's special because, it seemed like all the other social media companies pre-Elon, kind of had co-conspirators, like Yoel Roth in there enforcing the exact same mindset that the governments were wanting. Yeah. And Musk, obviously, as odd as he is, and for all his faults, I do credit him a lot with what he's done. So, it feels like this arrest of this comedian is sort of an inflection point. I don't know why. It just, I'm on Twitter a lot, and it just seems like that in combination, like what I've seen on maybe the last 2 weeks, there's really been a change about migration in Europe and people's willingness to comment on it. And, it's almost like every person in the UK needs a buddy in the US that they can just send their tweets to, and then we can post them, and then they can say, hey, follow this guy. They probably get arrested for that too. But, Malice was just on a podcast. I listened to him, and I think he's pointing out that, when they're coming to arrest you for your speech, like they are now in the UK, the violence has already started. So,
right.
It really seems like things are coming to a head, and, and what are we going to do about it? Because like you said, the UK doesn't have a free speech culture or a free speech legal aspect. We have both, but, I fear that the education system in this country, they're certainly not teaching, hey, the founding fathers and free speech and all the things that we grew up with. Anyway, I'll let you guys comment.
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of some kind of program where everybody gets a buddy, you know. But it could be called Buddies for Britons.
Buddies for fit. Yeah, exactly.
Like, it would have to have a theme song that was really inspirational.
I just realized I have my now panic and freak out mug. I didn't even realize it was subconscious.
a little more American. You know, like there are organizations over there. People keep on asking FIRE to extend, you know, beyond the borders of the United States, and it's like, listen, by the time we have full coverage in every state in the union, then maybe we'd consider that. But we're probably like, you know, $400 million away from something like that. Like we're just not big enough to take that on. But there are people over there fighting for free speech, and I think that they, you know, have a fighting chance, only due to the fact that the government has badly overplayed its hands. And when you have a situation, you know, where everybody is just being essentially asked to lie about things that they're seeing with their own eyes, you know, that's a hard one to sustain. And once you start actually enforcing it with the threat of violence, and of course, police is a threat of violence. Police oftentimes is violent. Then you're already in a sort of downward spiral situation. So I'm pretty worried about the situation in the UK right now, because it does have all the markings of a powder keg.
And I guess the other thing too is none of this seems organic. You know, it's like who's got what pictures of who with who in the UK government. You know what I mean? It's like none of this makes sense to me from a standpoint. It doesn't, you know, it's not helping the citizenry, you know, the rape gangs and the cover-ups and all this. And, you know, Elon, again, for as weird as he is and you know, as ridiculous as he can be, you know, he really is a champion on this.
Yeah.
And, you know, and without Twitter there, you know, if, you know, I think the UK would like nothing more than just say Twitter can't exist here. And then, you know, then who's the voice, you know?
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, like, and we're critical of everybody on free speech when they give us reason to be. But one thing that I probably don't say enough is that the counter sort of factual situation in which Elon didn't buy Twitter is a situation where I think free speech would be in much graver trouble than it is right now, because everybody would be the same. You know, essentially, like all of these companies would more or less be acting like their European counterparts and agreeing that, you know, pointing out that, you know, so some of your like some of your recently added immigrants were in rape gangs. Well, that's just, people shouldn't know that, you know, like they can't be trusted with that kind of information. That's a very typical, you know, ruling class kind of opinion to have about the people you rule, is that these people are savages and we have to keep them in line. And unfortunately, I do see a lot of that, you know, in Europe, and I do see some of that in the United States as well. And we have to do everything in our power to fight that.
Okay, thank you, Curtis.
Yep.
I'm going to bring up Craig. Oh, wait, where did he go? You can't lower your hand right as I'm about to click on you, Craig. There we go. A pin. There we go. And ask to unmute. All right.
Sorry, Maggie.
That's all right.
How dare you, Craig? You're fired. No, I'm just
First
kidding.
thing first, like this, can we just be excited about what we're doing this right now? This is freaking amazing. I'm in my kitchen. Tomorrow's the first day of school. Question was just asked: Where did my son put his lunch bag when his last day of school, which is 3 months ago? Because we can't find his lunch bag. You think he might be there? Still probably not. Anyway, but I knew Greg would appreciate that. Anyhow, Greg, you and I connected on Forky years ago. On Twitter somehow.
From Pixar? I love Forky.
Uh-oh.
Oh no, did it break up?
He
I wanna have a
froze.
discussion of Forky.
Craig froze.
He froze on Forky.
Right as you were about to get the
There's
goods.
a Forky line that's just like, no.
Forky's the best.
Oh, did
Oh,
you
no.
know what Forky explains it all, or like the shorts that they had on Pixar?
On Pixar?
Yeah.
God, Pixar's so brilliant.
Well, in the meantime, Greg, I'll ask a question. We'll see if we can get Craig back. But Reynolds had a question. I don't know if we have time to bring him up again, but he wanted to know your opinion about the TikTok ban.
My opinion on the TikTok ban is actually not something I could explain in a minute.
Okay.
It's actually well, okay, I'll try to explain it really quickly. The law as written was unconstitutional. It was too broad, too vague, and it focused on propaganda. and propaganda is just, if the U.S. can ban propaganda, that's a weapon that it can use against, you know, everybody essentially. So we objected to that. The Supreme Court kind of ignored that whole part of it. It was really the law, and then decided that TikTok is Chinese spyware. So of course we can stop Chinese spyware. And that's actually, if they'd opened with that argument from the beginning, I'm not sure if I would have had an opinion on it at all, because like that's a privacy argument. That's a much more serious argument than saying that they can't spread propaganda to say this is Chinese spyware. But so I think that the Supreme Court found a way to rule in favor of the ban that kind of ignored part of it, but ended up being minimally potentially harmful to freedom of speech. But the idea that Trump is just not enforcing it is, I don't even know where to go with that, because it's like, yeah, I'm a civil liberties person, but I also believe that, you know, the law is the law as well. So it's just a big old mess.
Okay,
So
we've got Craig back. So let me
do it really fast.
That was really fast.
Yes,
and
that
good.
was.
I do think it's funny. We always joke about this. We're like, for all the stuff that the left gives Trump crap for, this is like the one area where he's acting like a king and ignoring the law blatantly. And they don't say anything about it because they want TikTok too.
All right, Craig is back.
Follow up on what the point you were just saying, Bridget. From what I understand, part of the negotiations with the EU and the UK for trade negotiations is including Trump trying to talk about this with them, which, I mean, that's definitely king shit right there. So he's trying to negotiate a trade deal at the same time he's trying to negotiate some sort of terms on speech. Greg, I don't know if you've ever heard this before.
Oh, wait, but what were you going to say about Forky? That's more
I was
important.
telling you about Forky because Greg and I, Disney Plus had just began, and for some reason I was interacting with him on X because I love coddling the American mind. And I read it immediately, and I found him when I was trying to just get on and get his attention. I did. I'm actually speaking to you right now, Greg, which is amazing. That's part of my point earlier, and then I froze, but that's all right. But we were talking about Forky asked a question.
Yeah,
which is hilarious shit, man. It's the best.
It's amazing.
Anyway,
okay, Craig, sorry, we are low on time. So if you have something you want to talk to Greg about.
My train of thought has no caboose, so I won't get into my question, but I will say to Bridget and Maggie, thank you for doing this. You're fantastic. Bridget, the thing you shared with your uncle's letter was fantastic. I love that. That was a while back now. And second of all, I want more of you on Pirate Wires.
Oh,
Every morning, I read that every single morning before I start work, and I laugh every day. I like legitimately laugh out loud every day.
yeah,
So
they're great. I love Mike Solana so much.
And Greg, I wish I could talk to you more because I had a question about the Enlightenment and how we made up these human values, and now we're trying to enforce them on countries that don't have them. So, I don't know what we're going to do with all this stuff. It's like, I call it the battle of the make-believes.
Yeah.
Because we think that you should have free speech. That's a make-believe idea. And some other country, I believe something else, which is a make-believe idea. So we're battling over legitimately nothing. It blows my mind.
Yeah.
It's hard to be human, is all I'm saying.
I think some ideas are better than others. and I think it's a very good idea.
Yeah. But, you're a constitutional lawyer. You're a constitutional lawyer, correct, Greg?
I am, yes.
You mentioned standing earlier. Standing is how they get everything thrown out of court these days, isn't it?
Really, the court has doubled down. They've decided to make getting standing a lot harder in a lot more cases, and I often see that as a genuine cop out, particularly in First Amendment cases.
So I'm on your side.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Maggie. Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
All right,
everybody. Lovely.
Thank you, everybody.
Love the glasses.
Thank you. Thank you for all your work and all of the hard cases you're fighting, and for taking your time tonight after you're cooked from your long day to be here with us and take questions. Where can we find you and your stuff, your new book?
Thefire.org it is where you can find a lot about me. The new book is War on Words, and I'm also on Substack at The Eternally Radical Idea.
Thank you, Craig. Greg.
We're all cooked.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Greg.
We love you.
Love you. Good to see you.
Everyone watch Greg on Walk-ins Welcome as well.
Oh, yeah, that was great. I got to promote that one too.
Okay.
Have a good night.
Well, everyone, Everyone,
That was a great conversation.
thank you so much for, all of your contributions. I hear a lot of chaos downstairs. I don't know if you guys can hear that on.
I don't think so.
Okay. Thank you to our guest, Greg Lukianoff. Thank you to those of you who showed up and asked questions. Thank you to Two-Way and their amazing team. Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you, Bridget.
And thank you, Quest, for sponsoring this show. Visit questhealth.com and use a discount code RealMay25 and get 20% off your purchase. That's questhealth.com, code RealMay25 for 20% off. We are off next week, so please join us Wednesday, September 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern. If you're with us on Zoom, it's the same link every time. Thanks for getting real with me, guys. I'm Bridget Phetasy. Don't forget to tip your server.